All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Cordicate IT's October webinar for Cybersecurity Month. My name is Jeff Moser. I'm the CTO of Cordicate IT. Excited to have a conversation today about Arctic Wolf. Arctic Wolf is a fantastic partner of ours and really kind of a core member of our security stack. And it's important to note that because we've been trying to consolidate some of our security offerings down into something that would make sense for customers of all sizes. And where Arctic Wolf really shines is that they offer several components that are kind of key to preventing cyber risk these days, dealing with insurance companies when there is cyber risk, but also not just proactive support, but also reactive support for all kinds of different cybersecurity issues. Really, Arctic Wolf offers a couple of different products, which you're going to hear about today. They are a managed detection and response company that has one of the largest SOCs in the world. I think actually Brian will correct me that it is the largest SOC in the world now. And from that perspective, it's 24/7 monitoring of things like servers, endpoints, networks, as well as anything that might be in the cloud, whether it's in Azure, AWS, et cetera. And also, I think the other reason that we have really enjoyed working with them is that their product is agnostic when it comes to what it monitors. So once again, I said multiple cloud platforms, but also multiple types of endpoints and endpoint security software. So it doesn't have to be their product, but they still have the ability to monitor it, gather telemetry data out of it, and then also be able to control it, shut it down, make sure that cyber risk is prevented before it, kind of spreads throughout the organization. In addition to that, Arctic Wolf offers a couple of other products that can be bought either a la carte as well as part of an overall package deal. So in addition to the MDR platform, they do incident response, which could help to remediate a cyber incident as it happens. And they will even work with your cyber insurance company to make sure that it's covered and or paid. They'll work with the bad actors on trying to negotiate terms if it comes down to that. They also offer an education solution for keeping everybody up to date on how to prevent cyber risk within the organization. And they also have an endpoint protection solution as well. And the nice thing is that all of those components, if purchased together, kind of work together as one full package with a single pane of glass so that you can monitor it all from one place. So excited for everybody to hear about this. I know that we've done a couple of presentations about this before, but Arctic Wolf is a very, very important partner of ours. And so very, very interested in continuing the conversation, both with existing customers as well as new customers. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it off to Brian, and Brian's going to get started on his presentation.
Good deal. Well, thank you very much, Jeff, and the entire Cordicate team. You're absolutely on the money. We are the largest commercial SOC in the world. We are second to the Department of Defense, which they are not exactly going out to bid on many contracts out in the commercial sector. So just know that from a solution standpoint here, let me share my screen. We offer many things. We'll highlight a couple of the pieces from a security solution perspective, but in short, we are a 24/7 SOC. We also offer endpoint tools. We do vulnerability scanning. We do employee awareness training. We also offer an incident response retainer. So I won't go too far in the weeds on a lot of those pieces, but know if you are interested in any follow-up information, we'd be happy to get connected and have a brief conversation. But before I kind of get into what I want to talk about as it relates to Cybersecurity Awareness Month, very quick introduction. So like many people that find themselves in security today, started with, I guess, a pretty mixed background. Started as a computer science individual, quickly found out I was more social than a lot of the computer science people that I guess took a lot of classes with, and determined that a move into the more like infrastructure, network security space was going to be a long-term play for me. So bouncing between database administration roles, SQL, let's see, a lot of SQL, MySQL, we're talking SCCM, Intune, managing a medley of network appliances, on-prem and in cloud solutions. Somewhat of a, I guess, jack of all trades, master of none. I've been now at Arctic Wolf for, it'll be 4 years and a week and a half here, speaking specifically with organizations in the Mid-Atlantic about what they're doing for cybersecurity and, of course, if Arctic Wolf would be a good fit. So with all that being said here, Let's talk, I guess, agenda real quickly. What I would like to highlight is one, the findings of our incident response team. So I mentioned we have an incident response retainer. I want to walk through some of the findings that not only our broader, we'll say Arctic Wolf Labs team, so the group that does a lot of our typical reporting and builds out our corpus of response capabilities for all of our various solutions, not only the insights they have, but the IR side of the house as well. So what are they seeing from folks that are engaging us to help recover from some unpleasant incidents? So we'll talk specifically about business email compromise and ransomware, as those are the two big buzzwords right now in the space. And then, of course, what we can do to make sure that you don't end up a statistic on one of these sites. So that being said, what I want to start with here highlights a resource that the FBI publishes. So for those unfamiliar, the IC3 report, or Internet Crime Complaint Center report, is something that the FBI publishes annually, and it's how they track reported cyber crimes and their associated losses. So the only thing to really note on this slide here is you'll see that losses continue to go up and up and up. I don't think that's a surprise with just inflation and how more organizations are becoming more and more cloud centric. There's just more money bouncing around in that space. The one thing that does kind of stand out there, as I'm sure you'll see, there's a dip in registered complaints between 2021 and 2023. So what's important to note here, losses are something that are publicly made available. Complaints are something that organizations will opt into. If you are fortunate enough to be in an unregulated industry where you don't have to formally document any sort of cybercrime and share it with your customer base or the powers that be, a lot of organizations will opt not to do so, especially if we're looking at something like, we'll say, business email compromise or fund transfer fraud, where, hey, you had money, somehow you gave it away. Usually people don't want to air their dirty laundry, right? And it's easy enough to just sweep that under the rug and move on with your day. If you were to be encrypted, let's say your environment or environments were brought down, it's a lot harder to hide something like that. Typically, that would have to be disclosed again at that point to either insurance brokers, carriers, anyone tied to service delivery from a vendor or customer perspective. So with that being said, since 2020, we've seen a large threat or a large surge in cryptocurrency related crimes. A lot of the losses that you'll see from 2022 onward are going to be tied to crypto schemes. And because a lot of those typically don't bring a business down fully, they might impact revenue streams and people getting their paychecks. A lot of organizations will opt not to report that formally. But all that being said, let's look at some numbers. So I pulled this from their 2024 report, and you'll notice I highlighted it for Pennsylvania, but this data exists for every state, and you're going to see some pretty similar, we'll say, relative numbers between all of them. So the first one that I want to highlight is ransomware down here. 146 reported cases of ransomware in the state of Pennsylvania last year. Might sound low, might sound high to you, but then you look at business email compromise, which is sitting 753, just about 4 times over that, if not more. With that being the case, I think it's important to also see the cryptocurrency related cases at the bottom here. There's going to be some overlap with a lot of these buckets. Oftentimes, credentials that have been compromised in business email compromise will go on to lead to like a cryptocurrency or just a ransom of an environment. You'll see extortion as well. The important thing to note is threat actors are going to do anything they can to get access to your environment. Once they have it, they'll do whatever they can to potentially cause some pain and get a payout. Business email compromise, I like to think of it as more of a smash and grab. You get in the environment, you trick someone into transferring payments or changing bank statement or routing information, and then you get out before anyone realizes. Ransomware, while it can happen overnight, typically it's a more long process, long and drawn out. There's going to be the process of finding an environment, getting that initial access, trying to find something sensitive that they can encrypt, and then ultimately extorting. Now, if any odd, threat group were to land on a print server or a user device in your environment, that would be unpleasant to say the least, right? But you could probably re-image and roll to backups. But if they were to find a SQL box, if they were to find a domain controller and then do something there, well, naturally that can cause some real significant business impact. Authentication, workflows, ERP systems, CRMs, you name it, could all be impacted, and that revenue generation can come to a screeching halt. So I'm not here to say that business email compromise is more severe than ransomware. They're both very I guess, critical to prevent against in an environment if you want to make sure that you can keep the doors open and the lights on. But just some food for thought with these numbers, as a lot of folks typically see ransomware as the main thing they need to avoid, when business email compromise largely can be just as damaging, if not more. So, talking about this IR report that we put together as an organization, I'm highlighting some of the findings. So this is not the full report. Just wanted to pick some statistics and just insights that I think are fairly relevant to it, really any organization. As an IR team, what we hope to do here is do three things. One, highlight what attacks are prominent and what you should be mindful of and protecting against, how they're doing that. So hiding in plain sights, you'll see the term TTP used a couple times. For those unfamiliar, there's an organization by the name of MITRE, and what they do is document how threat actors will get into an environment and ultimately exploit something. So by understanding how they do these things, we're able to at least put, we'll say, either full stopgap preventions in front of them so they can't be exploited in the first place, or at least have monitoring in place so that you're made aware if a threat actor is trying to, leverage a local Windows utility to bypass the security control. The last piece is really talking about what can be done from a broad security perspective to just minimize the likelihood that these TTPs would become relevant at all. So, looking at reported cybercrimes, I think based on the IC3 report that I highlighted earlier, it's no surprise that ransomware and business email compromise are going to be the largest components there. Intrusions is that can really lead either way. That can either be a physical intrusion, that can be business email compromise, it could be bypassing a firewall rule. There's some shades of gray there, but what this boils down to is the majority of the IR cases that we specifically see would be when an environment has been encrypted and there's a full ransomware exercise going on between our IR team and then the threat actors, typically through some web portal. Business email compromise, a lot of organizations will say, hey, we just want to make sure that we are back to a clean slate here, that root cause has been identified and we've moved on. But largely, despite the fact that organizations are more likely to get hit by business email compromise, organizations that get hit by business email compromise or BEC are less likely to report it, because typically it's just hey, we lost some money, we don't want to do that again. Let's make sure that we have MFA enabled on these accounts and move forward. So that being said here, I want to walk through what business email compromise looks like. I think for everyone on the call right now, probably fairly familiar with business email compromise and multi-factor authentication. MFA is the number one thing that any organization can do to minimize the likelihood that they're getting hit. The second would be an awareness training. So helping your end users spot red flags within business communications, whether it comes from Outlook, whether it comes from a phone, whether it's coming from LinkedIn or some social media. We want to make sure that there are, a trail of breadcrumbs that can be effectively followed and responded to should somebody bypass that kind of first stopgap being MFA within an environment. So that all being the case here, business email compromise incidents by industry. I think these numbers are probably not too surprising for a lot of the folks on the call here. The idea here with business email compromise usually being more of a smash and grab, let's get in and get out. They want to attack targeted spear phishing attempts towards organizations that are going to be liquid with financials, right? If you were to hit a lawn care service or a lemonade stand with business email compromise, they probably don't have a whole lot of money that you could take right then and there. But if you target credit unions and banks, insurance providers, or legal entities that are backed or follow specific compliance frameworks, that's typically when you're going to find a little bit of money that you can potentially do something with, and hopefully trick people into giving before they identify it as some sort of anything other than typical business practices. But when it comes to responding, or the first point of entry here, it's almost entirely phishing. That's not to say that credentials can't just be bought and sold. There's going to be social engineers out there that look at someone like myself and say, hey, I wonder if his email address is brian.franson@arcticwolf.com. I don't think it takes a lot of creativity to kind of brute force your way through domains. And from there, just trying libraries of very common passwords. Just taking a step back before coming to Arctic Wolf, I can't tell you how many times I've seen the password summer with a capital S, whatever year it is, 2022, exclamation mark, real original. I think a lot of people are just going for that, we'll say safe place so that they don't forget, but in doing so, they often leave themselves open to a lot of risk. But for the most part, it's not just brute force attempts against environments that will certainly happen, but phishing is largely going to be that first point of failure into a business email compromise sort of scenario. Phishing is going to be something that I think every organization should put a stronger emphasis on, simply because every organization that has IT staff, whether security minded or not, will hopefully have either the internal skill sets or a third party that they can rely on to document best practices for their access control list within their firewalls, just real one-to-many controls that minimize the likelihood that anyone could potentially bypass a security control within your environment. So I guess in short, ransomware is something that IT professionals work diligently day in and day out to prevent, where business email compromise is something that everybody, at least in theory, should be working to prevent. It is not unreasonable to think somebody could come in to the office a little uncaffeinated, see something that's either urgent, requires immediate lift, or just potentially concerns them. They click on it before they realize what's happening, and now the keys to the kingdom have been effectively handed over to who knows who. So when we see things like that, I want to spell out an incident here that kind of highlights what an organization can do to really detect and respond to it in real time. It'll never replace ongoing security awareness training, making sure that your users are aware of their role in cybersecurity, and more importantly, they can identify the red flags in a business email compromise sort of phishing email before it gets to a spot where somebody clicks on it. But that being said, even if you have MFA in place, if you're training everyone, no one or no system is infallible. People make mistakes from time to time. So something like what I'm about to show you would be one way in which we can potentially solve the problem. So the first piece here, naturally, it starts with some level of stolen credentials. Now, these can be purchased from another threat group that's compromised them or skimmed them from a previous security incident, or if it's something that was phished earlier in the day. Regardless, they will start by trying to get that access. So they are now logging into this M365 environment with these credentials. We'll see user Jack Bomba up there is getting a whole bunch of MFA pushes to allow this. This is what we call an MFA fatigue attack. Uber experienced something very similar a little over a year ago at this point. What this user is trained to think here is they're getting a phone or an alert on their phone. This is security related. Maybe they just logged into a platform and it signed them out and they're signing back in, or they're tied to a service account that has access to something. It's not unreasonable to think you might get an MFA push at a certain time of the day when you're not expecting it. Either way, what we want to encourage people to do is not respond to it. In fact, deny it if you're not the one that manually triggered it. However, again, people are fallible. Users can click on things whether they think it's legitimate or if they're just trying to make it go away. Either way, doing something like this gives them access, this give them being the threat actor here. So now a third party has now established access to that M365 mailbox. They are now logged in, and at this point, they can do more or less whatever they want within that web environment. There's going to be two things that are going to be necessary in order to pull off a fund transfer fraud sort of scenario. One, you need to find out who controls the purse strings, and two, you need to give them a very easy and friction-free way to give you what you're looking for. So oftentimes that will be just a request to change bank and routing information, or it might be here's a crypto wallet, or here's some gift cards that we're going to hand out at a local convention. Go ahead and send us all this information so that we can purchase on your behalf. Regardless, they're going to look to try to understand how the business operates, who would be asking for money from whom, and ultimately how they can mimic how any organization will typically engage for those sorts of asks. One thing to note here, if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, I think a lot of it would boil down to, hey, if you haven't talked to someone specifically on the phone, verified it either in person or directly via a phone call, let's make sure that we're just shutting it down initially. But it was typically a lot easier to identify when these cyber events were happening, because these are folks that were maybe not raised with English as their native language. A lot of copying, pasting going on. There's some syntax errors. There's going to be just things that kind of feel off. But now that we're living in the year 2025 here with access to ChatGPT and other LLMs in our pockets, it's a lot easier for non-native English speakers who are effectively working out of brick and mortar operations at this point to mimic not only native English speaking, but specifically how individuals talk. So by, hypothetically reviewing people's social media posts, and anything else that they put on the web, they're able to more accurately copy how someone would talk, mimic even just like nicknames, and get to a spot where they are making the target of the threat feel more comfortable that they're dealing with a legitimate person rather than a threat actor located who knows where. But that all being said here, once they've identified, who's holding the purse strings, who they want to go after, how they want to ask for it, and how they'd effectively cut and run, at that point, they'll usually try to make sure that they have some persistence. Step 6 might happen before step 5. The idea here is they want to hide, lay in wait as long as possible. So by creating either backdoor accounts or by creating email forwarding rules or double deletion rules. So not only are they sending emails received to, say, like a burner Gmail account, they're also deleting sent items and deleted items so that if my account were compromised, I wouldn't even know that it's being used to send emails that weren't, again, from me specifically. All of those things you'll see in the right-hand column can typically be picked up by an MDR service. So again, if you don't have MFA in place, that's the absolute first thing I would recommend you do. The second would be making sure that you have some level of logging within your Office 365 log or Office 365 or Google Workspace environment for that matter. Having awareness training program in place as well will just minimize the likelihood that somebody will click on something junky in the first place. And if we want to go one step further, having a dedicated email gateway. So something, whether it's just Microsoft's built-in gateway, something a more robust like third-party tool set, whatever it is, by hardening that, you're just reducing the likelihood things are getting through in the first place. And then, of course, if we're looking best case scenario, have an MDR service in place, whether something that you run internally or that it goes through a trusted third party, making sure that you have someone looking at logs 24/7 and could disable compromised accounts when we see activity consistent with threat actor activity. That will largely minimize the likelihood that you ever find yourself in a situation such as this. So it's typically where I'd ask for questions. I know we're not doing that right now, so I'm going to march on and talk a little bit about resiliency. But know that if you have any questions here, again, I think I already spoiled it, brian.franson@arcticwolf.com. Pretty easy to get a hold of. Be more than happy to answer any questions you might have there. But when it comes to resiliency, I did walk through a couple of these pieces already. Make sure that your email gateway has been reviewed to be as buttoned up as possible. So your DKIM, your DMARC, your SPF, and MX records, the things that control what kind of emails can get through in the first place, you're going to want that as buttoned up as possible, right? Nobody wants to get to a spot where legitimate emails are being blocked, but I can guarantee you don't want to be in a spot where people have the options to click on emails that should just be blocked outright. So minimizing, again, the number of failure points that are coming through is going to be important. Multi-factor authentication policy should be, I think, just kind of par for the course at this point. We'll just say the year 2025, if it has access to any sensitive information at all, MFA should absolutely be enabled. You might even go a step further and look at geofence policies. So maybe you don't allow the Outlook web app and it can only be connected from the desktop app with the VPN connected. You can get really granular with those sorts of controls. From, hey, let anyone do anything, wild, wild west, to, hey, let's make sure that everything's completely isolated, and a lot of the native tools that web threat actors will use, so like the Outlook web app, are just completely blocked for your organization, at least if it's not coming from a device with maybe a whitelisted MAC address. Getting carried away there, but in short, things like that, the geofence conditional access, which is more or less a more robust version of multi-factor authentication, that those will all be more tools and policies that can be modified. But just from a people perspective, if we're trying to minimize the likelihood that funds do get transferred, making sure this sort of thing is verified over phone call by saying, hey, this user needs to call me specifically. It can't just come from like an email request or just like a Slack or Teams message. It needs to be something that's initiated with multiple forms of confirming who the user is. All things that'll minimize the likelihood that you, again, become a potential statistic. So that's business email compromise. Again, it can start with any form of compromised credential or just a brute force attempt against an environment. This sort of thing is largely hitting well, not just Pennsylvania or the Mid-Atlantic, the United States. Oftentimes, again, people won't report these losses because they don't have to. But know that while it won't necessarily bring a business down and stop revenue from generating, if you happen to have, 100,000 or plus transferred away overnight, you got to ask yourself, which budget is that coming out of? If I not to get again too carried away, but when it comes to incident response in general, a lot of organizations are thinking, hey, I have a business continuity or disaster recovery plan in place. Is this good enough? Or do we want to start pre-budgeting for a cyber event? I know that's potentially a hard pill to swallow for a lot of shops when they're already competing for budget to get some of these tools and services in place in the first place. But when organizations are hit, I'll say business email compromise largely is not something that hits IT departments. It's usually accounting, finance, organizations that have access to money. If something like that were to happen, what you don't want to end up doing probably is getting in a fingers pointing match saying, well, it's accounting's fault because they clicked on an email, and they turn around and say, we shouldn't have been able to fail in the first place because you let those things through. It could be entirely unpleasant. So just know when it comes to incident response, sadly, it more speaks to the state of cybersecurity, but a lot of organizations are starting to pre-budget for a cyber event. So should something happen, the funds are already there, paid for, and any IR services can just march forward without any internal friction. Or if you don't use it, well, now you've got a bucket of funds that can maybe be applied towards kicking the tires on your, like a tabletop exercise or any other improvement to your cybersecurity. But that all being said, that's business email compromise. I want to talk a bit about ransomware as well, because that is naturally one of the scariest things in cybersecurity. We're not just looking at ransomware anymore. Again, if we were looking 5, 10 years back, ransomware would be the main, I think, focus, as a lot of organizations weren't rolling backups. In fact, so when I worked for an MSP over a decade ago at this point. When I worked there, one of my first exercises was trying to find out how we convert US dollars into Bitcoin, which that was a rude awakening for this small gas station that had all of their accounting information saved on QuickBooks on a desktop sitting on a 24 pack of Mountain Dew in their back room. This was a completely different time. A lot of organizations weren't doing backups. They got encrypted, and they had absolutely no option but to pay the extorted request. Organizations today largely take backups of at least production environment. There may be a delta of a week, or if you're unlucky, bi-weekly, hopefully daily, or potentially multiple times a day, just to make sure that if something were lost, you're not losing a whole day's worth of transactions. But now that folks are taking backups, organizations on the threat actor side are coming through and they're saying, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and steal all your data first. So we're either going to do a drip feed of sensitive information over the course of days, weeks, or months, or we're just going to do it all over, all at once overnight. We'll just do a bulk export. And from there, once we have, whether it's screenshots or fully exported documents, we'll at that point kick off the encryption. So what they can say is, hey, we encrypted your environment. If you don't pay us, we're not giving you the key. And you could say, hey, well, we have backups. We're not going to pay you regardless. And they say, well, that's great. We're going to take all the information we stole from you, and we are going to sell it on the dark web. We're going to release it to your competitors. We're going to release it to your customers. They're going to do whatever they can to create some pain for you. As a security provider, the goal is to make sure that, one, you can verify, well, one is just stop them from doing that in the first place. Second best is making sure that you fully understand what, if anything, was taken from an environment. Because if I were to come into your environment and say, hey, you're giving me $500,000, otherwise I'm going to leak, the secret formula to Coca-Cola, you could say, well, I don't believe you stole that. Can you prove it? Well, I'd say, well, I don't have a screenshot of that. How about $300,000? By having some form of log management, you're typically able to get a lot of organizations to back off, because if they claim they have this, that, and the other, and they only have this, well, the amount of pain that they can cause you is then minimized, and any sort of demand coming from a third party would typically be minimized. But all of that being said, let's talk a little bit about what organizations are being hit by ransomware. This one is going to be a little different than business email compromise, simply as ransomware, we'll say threat actors, they typically don't care who they hit. They'll cast a wide net and see who they could potentially encrypt. Every organization can be brought down by crippling their ERP or their CRM or their logon services. It's not just hey, let's go after financial institutions. They're naturally going to be targets as well, but largely what we've seen is organizations that might be using aging infrastructure. So manufacturing, construction, these are going to be typically more dated systems and environments. At least in my experience, that's not to say you're not going to find organizations there that aren't on the cutting edge. But largely, we've seen a lot of legacy systems. I've had conversations with folks still using, Windows Server 2012 R2. These more aging kind of industries, I think, have more of a target on their back because they are so reliant on their ERP system. A lot of them still on-prem. So if that were to be brought down, they can't track projects, they can't dispatch, they really can't do a lot of their revenue generating activities. So that being said, everyone is potentially a target here. That's not to say you're better off if you're in shipping and logistics than you are if you're in manufacturing. This is just kind of a bit of a by the numbers report. But that being the case, ransomware and data exfiltration. I spoke earlier about how business email compromise is largely something that is, we'll say, the responsibility of just the average Joe within an environment. Everyone that has access to their email system could potentially be a vector for a threat actor to get into an environment and cause some problem. When it comes to ransomware and data exfiltration, what are we looking here? 92.6% of the time, these incidents start with an external exposure. This isn't to say that it's always some misconfiguration on the IT side. There's certainly going to be access control lists and policies within firewalls or virtual firewalls that are maybe a little, maybe not restrictive as restrictive as they could be, and they give opportunity to these would-be criminals to exploit and ultimately get into an environment. But we will also see just zero-day vulnerabilities pop up about once a month. Our SOC either exposes or through our threat intelligence feeds will be made aware of very popular firewall makes and models that I won't name names here that I think a majority of the people on this call would be familiar with. These things, unfortunately, they're patched and usually very swiftly addressed by these producers and manufacturers. However, a lot can happen in any number of hours that go from, hey, we've determined that this is an issue because we're seeing it actively exploited in the wild. We have a fix, and now that fix has been fully deployed out to all of our customers. Oftentimes, that last component needs to be opt-in unless you have a relationship with your vendor that says, hey, there you can do whatever firmware patches make sense just to mitigate the likelihood something is bypassed. But largely, a lot of times what we'll see here is going to be, again, some zero day that's been exploited. You don't really get an awful lot of time to respond to those sorts of things. And even if you do, if they're already in your environment and establish persistence, it could be a game of whack-a-mole to effectively stop anyone that is in your environment. So when it comes to ransom demands, the one thing to note here is there's been kind of initial leveling out in some of the fields. You'll notice some of them have gone down quite significantly from 2023 to 2024. I think this is due to the fact that organizations posture themselves a little better with disaster recovery and business continuity plans. So again, to the example earlier, if I had the recipe to the secret formula for Coca-Cola, I have it completely segmented, hidden somewhere in my environment, encrypted. If that is being stolen, I have logging in place to see when that was ever accessed. So if they say, hey, the most sensitive information you have here, we have it, I would say prove it. If they can't prove it, well, now their initial demand has taken quite a nosedive. With the numbers I showed earlier, of course, the amount of payouts have been increasing year in and year out, at least by an aggregate perspective. So every organization as a contributing, I guess we'll say, victim there. But the individual ask has gone down simply because they know that a lot of organizations don't have that initial high asking point. And even if they can pull in $50,000 from an environment, that's a really good day for them. So by starting a little more realistically when it comes to price, usually minimizes the likelihood that someone's immediately going to say, go take a long walk. I'm just going to rebuild everything manually, either from backups. But when it comes to ransomware, the the negotiation piece of having a dedicated IR team in place is really going to be where I think a lot of the value is. It's not to say that you should get an IR plan because you'll need it, because you will be a statistic someday. I'm not here to fearmonger, but what I am here to say is that if you ever do find yourself in an incident where you are being ransomed, by having a fully fleshed out plan that would not only help you remove any latent threats, restore any impacted system or systems, and again, make sure that it's just a clean, steady state environment, but you also have an arm of the business that would work on digital forensics, evidence gathering, and negotiating with threat actors. That initial cost of, let's call it 800,000 for retail in 2024, the odds are that that gets brought down pretty significantly, are very high if you have an IR team that is responsible and capable of performing those, we'll say, negotiation movements. When it comes to IR cases, I should mention this earlier, our team sees about 1,000 cases, just a little over that per year. So just think on average, three organizations are hit at least daily that we're going to be speaking with. And as a part of our IR services, typically we're bringing that ransom payment way down and even working with them to determine if it even makes sense to pay out in the first place. But how can ransomware occur within an environment? If I had a single answer, a silver bullet for this, it would probably be just a short sentence of unplug your internet, you're going to be good to go, but that is not realistic. You want to make sure that you have defense in depth in place, because what threat actors are doing today is fairly sophisticated. Long gone are the like script kiddie days where somebody living in their parents' basement, just executing some script that they bought online and trying to change somebody's background to something, inappropriate. Now you have, again, legitimate brick and mortar operations where they are buying and selling different strains of malware with other threat groups, trading account lists and everything tied to that to just take their shot at organizations that would be potential victims. So fileless malware is going to be something that is going to be, I think, more and more prevalent as we move forward, simply because there's a lot of very, very strong EDR solutions that are looking at things executing at the operating system level, but not everyone is looking at we'll say, the memory level where threats can start to operate now. So what we're seeing here is an attacker delivering a weaponized document. So let's say a macro-enabled docx file, whether it's clicked on via an email or they just dropped it straight on a desktop and executed specifically because that connection's already been established through one way or another. Either way, the file is there. It's a BBS script, and it is now executing a PowerShell commandlet, executing fully in memory. So this PowerShell commandlet is calling Mimikatz down from a GitHub repo. Mimikatz, for those unfamiliar, is a tool designed to skim for credentials. So it'll pull cache credentials from servers, laptops, and just presume that those are still current credentials. You can dump a list to wherever you want at that point, and then once these threat groups have these lists of credentials, they can do with it what they will. Maybe it's brute forcing against a server environment. Maybe it's kicking off a business email compromise attack with through other vectors. If somebody in accounts payable logged onto a finance server at some point, well, now if that person's email gets compromised and a request to change bank statement comes from them instead of the intern that clicked on something initially, it is a lot easier to potentially get to that level of asking, or I should say demanding, that people change things from a financial perspective and they see that business email compromise payout. But that all being said, persistence, of course, is another step here. By this being step 5 doesn't necessarily mean it's the last thing to happen. Oftentimes, the moment somebody gets into an environment, they'll try to establish the persistence. So if they can't just skim credentials, they might just look to latch onto a scheduled task, replicate user login so that they know every time somebody's accessing that box that those credentials are current and a copy of them are being piped up to the command and control server here. So that being the case, it's not all doom and gloom here. The Arctic Wolf visibility side really just highlights what an MDR vendor can capture if you have them fully deployed. So a strong MDR provider is going to have some level of network monitoring, so you can look at north-south traffic between known bad IP addresses. They're also going to have the ability to take action on your behalf, so isolate endpoints when we believe we're looking at signs of compromise, threat actor behavior consistent with threat actor, we'll say data exfiltration largely. or those encryption commands. And then finally, making sure that you have a team that can work through resiliency. So what you don't want to do as an IT shop, I imagine, is go through any incident more than once. That's not to say that, again, there is a silver bullet outside of unplugging your internet, but by reviewing the one-to-many controls that a lot of organizations will have in place, firewall and VPN reviews. So you're looking at north-south traffic and everything. If it's being connected from externally, has been multi-factor auth and on a secure encrypted VPN tunnel. Restricting PowerShell. I still don't believe that a majority of the people on planet Earth know what PowerShell is to begin with. The person working the front desk probably doesn't need it all. Go ahead and block that so that that can't be weaponized against them in the first place. And then finally, just malware hardening. Hopefully, you have a very strong EDR and tool in place that can perform all the whitelisting function or blacklisting functions that you would specifically see with an EDR. But how about just disallowing things in the first place from even hitting your EDR tool, using things like App Locker to only allow things that are signed certifications running out of specific directories, preventing a lot of the common native toolkits in things like a Windows environment. So don't allow PowerShell to run. We don't need any .NET frameworks being modified by an end user that's only accessing Chrome and Office 365 suite. Looking at scheduled tasks as well, that's going to be one that I think is probably more on the emerging side of persistence, and that you'll always hear about threats being kicked off because somebody clicked on something that they shouldn't, and now that account's compromised and everything's executing from there. But what a threat actor is really licking their lips over is if they can get latched onto a scheduled task that has a service account tied to it, and that goes back to a domain controller. Odds are that'll give them everything that they need in terms of access, and they can, again, do with it what they will. So making sure, again, you're looking at every aspect from networking to endpoint is going to be very important just to minimize the likelihood of any sort of ransomware scenario executing within your environment. Two other things I want to quickly touch on here. So we talked a lot about the largest threats, business email compromise and ransomware. What can be done to, again, minimize? So just in recap here, having an IR plan is going to be important, right? It's not here to say that you need to start throwing money under, a pillow somewhere to save up for a rainy day. I think it makes sense, specifically if you are concerned about business email compromise, just to prevent a potential finger pointing situation down the road if someone were to click on something. But by having a plan in place that will help formalize who's paying for what, who from a business stakeholder perspective would be relevant during an investigation. So typically it's people in IT and security, leadership, potentially accounting, anyone tied to legal, potential vendors, customers, you name it. Documenting all that so you're not scrambling to figure out who's who in the zoo at 2 a.m. when you're getting your phone's ringing off the hook. Always important to have that peace of mind, not only from a security perspective, but if you're looking at minimizing your insurance deductibles or premiums going up, making sure that you have a formalized plan in place, even if you've never used it, will typically be something that a lot of those cyber insurance vendors will be asking for. Broad visibility is also important. At one point, monitoring just the endpoint and having a firewall in place was good enough. Threat actors, and unfortunately, they're advancing pretty rapidly as well. So by having visibility into everything that be relevant in an investigation, specifically network monitoring and then cloud logins, you give yourself a much stronger shot at preventing a cyber event from occurring in your environment. Identity controls, I've gone on ad nauseum, so all I'll say is they are very important. Uh, Much to the chagrin of end users everywhere, if you have to do 3 clicks to get into an environment instead of 2, it is obnoxious, but I can promise you it's a lot more obnoxious having to recover from an incident or saying, hey, I'm sorry, I thought it was legitimate, I was just doing my job. And then finally, establishing and continually fostering a culture of security. That goes back to cybersecurity awareness. I'd make a bet here that in 20 years, we're going to be better off as a society when it comes to business email compromise. But fact of the matter is, a lot of the folks working today that are potential victims were not raised with a smartphone in their pocket, much less a cell phone in their pocket. So a lot of these emerging threats with generative AI, the fact that everybody can use it to either deep fake from a video perspective, just text or audio, all of those are going to be more and more prevalent. They're not necessarily going anywhere, but hopefully individuals that kind of raised with technology as a part of their day-to-day life will be a little more little better positioned to spot these things and prevent that initial click that can cause so much damage for an organization. So, key takeaways. Threat actors embrace low-tech ways to bypass high-tech defenses. This just comes down to business email compromise and phishing, making sure that you have awareness to identify what those scams look like before you fall victim to them is very important. So whether you're doing this as an internal program you put on or using a third-party vendor to kind of automate the process, would strongly encourage you to have something in place. The ransomware landscape is a modern-day Hydra. What we mean by this, there are so many vectors into an environment that a threat actor can use. I talked a little bit about the MITRE organization earlier. I'm not going to spend any more than 30 seconds here, but this highlights some of the TTPs or techniques, tactics, and procedures that threat actors will use to get into an environment. All of these can be expanded multiple times to see kind of the different ways that these threat actors will typically operate. It's almost impossible to have a plan built out for every single component here, but by at least looking at some of the broader pieces and having not necessarily full monitoring response, but at least detections in place, gives you a strong shot at responding to an event before it can get to that exfiltration and ransomware stage. Those three cybersecurity event types, the intrusion, ransomware, and business email compromise, largely what we see here. The other components are typically going to be tied to malicious insiders, which if I had an answer for malicious insiders, I'd provide that right now. I'd say just keep your employees happy and minimize the likelihood that they want to potentially cause any pain for you. But should you experience one of those major events, having a group to turn to would be highly beneficial, not only just from the security and business uptime perspective, but also from the insurability piece. And finally, it's like brushing your teeth, prioritize patching whenever you can. Unfortunately, 0 days are never going away, and 0 days will continue to be capitalized on in that short amount of time. But by going through, doing your homework, and keeping Adobe Acrobat up to date, you're, again, putting yourself in really good shape and minimizing the likelihood that you're seeing, any unwanted activity on one of your endpoints. So that's about all I had here. I can go much deeper in the weeds here for anyone that is interested in seeing kind of a behind the scenes about how our security solutions specifically work with this. Of course, the Cordicate team, they offer a lot of, I guess, co-managed components as well, which I think would be certainly worth exploring if you're a smaller IT shop. But I'll stop sharing there. I just want to say thank you again to Jeff and the Cordicate team for having me on here. Cybersecurity is not always the most exciting thing in the world, but when done right, I think it can be a pretty interesting field, especially with the advent of AI on both the blue team and the red team side. But Jeff, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, no, Brian, that was great, and I appreciate the fact that you focused primarily on a lot of the things that a lot of businesses are seeing today, and not so much on like the product set, even though the product set that Arctic Wolf offers is very comprehensive. So I guess the one thing that I do want to add to that is kind of building on what you had just said. We do offer a couple of different options for cybersecurity protection for our customers. One is that Arctic Wolf is available as a product that can be resold, and we do have organizations that have their own IT departments, have their own sort of internal processes and procedures, and just use Cordicate for projects or for kind of strategic planning. So we do have the ability that you can consume Arctic Wolf technology in a couple of different ways. One would be to buy it for your organization, run it internally, manage it internally. There are also other ways that we've worked with customers. One is kind of a co-managed option, where if you have an internal IT staff, but potentially you're using some managed services from Cordicate IT, we can co-manage that environment with you, and then provide best practices, but work with you to make sure that everything is monitored and taken care of securely. Cordicate also has a fully managed service practice, as some of you may know, that we call Cordicare. And in that instance, we do have a version of Arctic Wolf technology that we would be fully managed by Cordicate IT. So we can still provide reporting, still, do on our monthly or quarterly meetings, show you what the environment is seeing, what was potentially caught, what Arctic Wolf is seeing within your organization on a regular basis, but it would be fully managed by Cordicate. So kind of a flexible model as far as how to consume the products and offerings that that Arctic Wolf offers. And in addition to that, I mean, there are things that we do as a managed service provider that Brian kind of touched on a little bit, which is like things like managed patching. So, we do have agents on all of the desktops, laptops, servers. We're patching all of the Windows environment, all of the applications on a regular basis, trying to keep those up to date. We do follow best practices for things like email security, as well as trying to enforce MFA across all of the organizations that we work with. So, Cordicate is as proactive as possible in some of these areas. But the technology that Arctic Wolf offers really kind of fills in those gaps and provides that additional layer of protection, as well as that blanket that if something does happen, that they're there to kind of jump in and help take control. As we talked about, work with the bad actors, build an incident response plan. That's really where we use them to kind of fill in the gaps from a product and offering perspective. So,
Excellent.
if nobody has anything else, I think that we can probably give back a couple of minutes of time. Brian, thank you very much for this. We really appreciate it. And I believe we're going to be posting this recording so that other people can see it as well if they either came late or weren't able to join at all. So I hope this was helpful for everybody. Cybersecurity Month is a good opportunity for all of us to kind of look at what we're doing as a business and make sure that we're protected and planning for the future. So it's a good kind of reason to take out a little bit of time in October and say, how can we be better? So, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and take care.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.